Now, with all the positive media coverage about Joe Biden, you may have missed that the new Biden administration has outlined a raft of tax increases, the most controversial of which is a plan for a new tax on unrealised capital gains. So that's an annual capital gains tax on assets someone holds on paper, not just at the point of sale, and this could be a house or shares. There are also plans for an increase to the company tax rate. And here's incoming Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen talking about this a few days ago.
On the 2017 tax cuts, the president has said that eventually, as part of a larger package that would include significant spending and investment proposals, he would want to repeal parts of the 2017 tax cuts that benefited the highest income Americans and large companies.
Joining me now, economics editor at The Australian, Adam Creighton, who's heading to the US shortly as the new Washington correspondent. Adam, thank you. How problematic would plan, if it was introduced, you know, an on-paper capital gains tax, how problematic is that?
Well, look, I think there's almost zero chance of it actually being introduced. It would be very unworkable. I don't know of any country in the world that has a capital gains tax on an unrealised basis. As you said, that means if you buy some shares and they go up in value, even if you don't sell them, you'll have to pay some sort of tax. Now, of course, that's going to lead to liquidity issues for many people, because if they haven't sold the shares on which they've made a profit, then they don't have the money to pay the tax. So, look, I'd be very surprised if it got through. But as you pointed out, the Biden administration does have quite a raft of proposed tax increases. I guess the most interesting one, apart from that, is that they want to lift the corporate tax rate from the current 21% to 28%, which is still lower than the 35% that it was a few years ago, before Donald Trump. But the big one for individuals is to increase the top marginal rate of income tax, which would apply to incomes over $400,000 a year, from 37 cents to 39.6, which was the rate that it was before Donald Trump. So certainly many tax increases there, but I don't think the capital gains tax one that you mentioned will actually end up being passed.
What do you think the impact of these taxes, and even if the unrealised capital gains one doesn't go ahead, what do you think the impact will be of the increase to company and personal tax rates will have on the US economy? And, you know, it famously has done well under Donald Trump.
It has. Yeah, well, look, certainly in the long run, it will make the US economy slightly smaller. That's what taxes always do. But I mean, we also have to remember that, you know, the US government faces a deficit which is so large, it's actually bigger even than the entire Australian economy. Like, that's, you know, the gap between the federal government's revenues and its expenses. So at some point, it is going to have to lift taxes in some way. And I suppose it does make sense to target the tax increases on those who can most readily afford it. But that's in practice, it can be very hard to raise much money, because, you know, well-off people always have ways of getting around taxes. So it's naive to think that you raise much money, as I think the Biden administration has somewhat naively assumed, from lifting certain of these taxes.
I'm not going to argue with you, a former Reserve Bank economist, but I would have thought curbing spending could be another way of reducing their deficit and debt. Look, I want to turn to the Australian economy. To the Australian economy. I really enjoyed Chris Kenny's column in the Weekend Australian this weekend, and I thought he made a really good point when he said that, you know, as a nation, we've spent we've had convulsions in our political debate over the past decade about how to return the budget to surplus, how to rein in debt, which is now forecast, or our deficit's now forecast more than $200 billion in the coming year, and the debt is forecast to top $1 trillion within 3 years. But he said, you know, we've now lost any political debate about this. And he says there seems to be this consensus across Australia that we can have tax cuts, we can have spending increases, endless debt, and nobody's concerned about any reckoning. You know, we're just moving into a welfare country. What do you think about that?
Yeah, certainly. Look, it was a very good piece. I think you could actually say 1.5 trillion will be the public debt burden when you include the states in a few years. So true, it is immense. And I mean, in Australia, there's, you know, so much self-congratulation at the moment, so much backslapping about how we've managed to defeat the virus. And of course, you know, that is very good, but it has come at a huge cost, which you're quite right, not many people are talking about. I mean, I have a piece in The Australian actually tomorrow that kind of looks at just how much we've actually spent per year of life saved. And it's about 5 to 7 times roughly of what we normally spend as a country, as a government, if you like, to save people's lives. So, you know, you could certainly argue that we've gone very, very much over the top. And true, it seems so far that there's no cost. Interest rates are still very low, but this process just can't continue all the time of having massive deficits every year. And we also have to worry about the lack of productivity growth in Australia too. I mean, we've been so fortunate with our exports to China at the moment that those prices have held up, those volumes have held up. But if something were to happen to those things, I think we very quickly realise that that our economy is very high cost, it's very inefficient in some ways, and we do pay too much tax as well.
Look, just a final question. Obviously, you're heading to Washington shortly. Very exciting, and congratulations on the new job.
Thank you.
How do you think that the new Biden administration will impact on Australia, in other areas, whether it's, putting more pressure on the Morrison government to act on climate change or...
Yes, look, I think two main ways. I think climate change is the one there. I mean, we all know that Joe Biden has put the US back in the Paris Agreement. I mean, the truth be known is it's actually not very hard for the US to live up to its agreements because it's already reduced its emissions quite a lot because of reliance on gas and nuclear energy. Certainly nuclear, we don't have that option here, of course. So you may see some pressure on Australia indirectly, I think, for us to lower our carbon emissions faster. I think we're the only developed country in the world that relies to a very great extent on these carbon credits to meet our Paris obligations. So there could be some indirect pressure there. I think the Democrats are not in favour of coal-fired power stations, and that, of course, is our biggest export, if you like, the coal that goes into them. So that could be a medium-term problem. And I think the second way that the Biden administration will affect Australia is in relation to the digital tech giants that you were talking about just earlier. The US government just, I think, last week put in a submission to that Senate inquiry, basically calling on the government to dump the legislation, which is, pretty strong words from our closest ally. Now, as you pointed out, the government has been very forthright. They're not going to take threats, etc., but it will be interesting to see how this evolves in coming months.
Adam Creighton, thank you very much, and look forward to chatting to you from Washington when you're over
Indeed.
there.
Thank you, Sharri.